Okay. Feel free to, if you have a comment on it. So the Mishnah starts, HaChalil Chamisha V'Shisha. And Chalil is referring to the Simchas Beis HaSheva. That's the chapter that we're studying. It's about the Simchas Beis HaSheva, the rejoicing that was done in the Beis HaMikdash when they were drawing the water and pouring the water for the during the holiday of Sukkot. And it says that it was 5 days or 6 days. Now, what the Mishnah meant, what the Mishnah means is that it depends if Shabbos is the day of Yom Tif or if Shabbos is Chol Hamoed. The kids know this because they want to go on Chol Hamoed trips. So they like when Shabbos and Yom Tif fall out on the same day. That gives them more days of Chol Hamoed. So for the Simchas Beis HaSheva, if Shabbos and Yom Tif is the same day, then they'll have 6 days where they can rejoice with the flute. The Chalil means the flute. And if Shabbos is during one of the, if Shabbos is during the Chol Hamoed days, not on the Yom Tif, so then they're only going to have 5 days because it's going to cut out 2 days that they can't blow the flute. Now, you've learned the Gemara ahead, so at this point you should be asking a question: what's wrong with blowing the flute on Yom Tif? The Mishnah ahead says that they would blow the shofar on Shabbos. How many, you learned that Mishnah, right? How many times did they blow it? They could blow it possibly 48 times, depending on how many korban musaf there. They blew the shofar. So how could our Mishnah, this is Taisva's question, so how could our Mishnah create this problem of blowing the flute on Yom Tif when there's no problem with blowing the shofar? Any attempted? Anyone want to attempt to try to answer that? Contradiction. This Mishnah says that we're not going to be able to blow. Let me read further in the Mishnah. Zeu Chalil Shabbos Sheva. This is the flute of Beis Sheva. She'ina Deichaleis Shabbos V'Leis Yom Tov. It doesn't push off Shabbos or Yom Tov. But if you turn the page, go to the Mishnah that you're holding on page 53. It says how many times they would blow the shofar on Shabbos. If there was a korban musaf, they would blow an extra 9. That's a tough one. Anyway, we'll take a look at that Taisvus. Do you have a traditional Gemara? Do you have a traditional Gemara that has the Gemara in the center and the Rashi and Taisvus around the side? Okay, so then I won't go through the Taisvus inside. I'll just tell you Taisvus' answer. Taisvus has this question. He has a bunch of questions, but to answer this question, he says that the reason why there's much bigger questions here. The bigger questions is that when it comes to the laws of Shabbos and the laws of Yom Tov, they're very much relaxed in the temple. In other words, there are certain times, we have to slaughter a sacrifice on Shabbos. Okay, because it says so in the Torah that this is the sacrifice of Shabbos. You can't slaughter an animal at home by the butcher on Shabbos. That's one of the 39 malachas, 39 prohibited acts. But in the temple, you are allowed to, and that's because the Torah says so. But there are rabbinic rules of Shabbos. It's called Shvus. The rabbinic laws of Shabbos is called the Shvus. And the Talmud tells us that Ein Shvus b'Mikdash. The rabbinic laws in the temple are relaxed. So what's the prohibition of blowing a flute? The problem with blowing the flute is that you might end up fixing it. Sometimes we have string instruments. The string snaps when they're playing it, and they have to retie a new string. Now, to retie the string, would be a prohibition because you can't make knots. But to play the instrument, suspecting that maybe it's going to break, that's a rabbinic law that you can't play the instrument because maybe it's going to break. So there really should be no problem with playing an instrument. And so therefore, when the Mishnah that you learned later, it says that you're allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbos and blow the shofar on Yom Tov, that's because there's no concern of fixing something when you're just blowing the shofar. However, when it comes to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, which didn't have just one shofar, it had many instruments. It had harps and the flutes and all types of drums and cymbals and had all of those instruments. Then the sages were more strict, and they said that even in the temple you can't have all of those instruments. So that's why when we learn in our Mishnah, we're saying this is a special rule because of the manifold instruments that were there. That's why there's a special decree here that we can't use it on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay, Tosfos has another question here. If you notice in this Mishnah, it says that this is the Chalil is 5 and 6. I'm referring to the days of how many possible days there are for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. If you go to the preceding Mishnayos in Lulav Arava, in the chapter before, which you did, right? You studied the chapter before, Lulav Arava. So in Lulav Arava, it says that the Lulav is taken 6 days or 7 days. The Halal and Simcha is 8 days. Nisach HaMayim, the pouring of the water, is 7 days. The Chalil is 5 and 6. Then it goes through, it says, what's the case when the Lulav is going to be 7 days, which in the Mishnah language, it's Lulav Shiva Ketzad. Tell me the case that it's going to be 7 days. And it says when the Yom Tov falls out. And it says what's going to be the Arava, how is that? It says how it falls out. So it goes through, it delineates the cases of how it's going to be 5 and how it's going to be 6. But when it comes to the Chalil, it doesn't do that. So Tosfos asks, how come the structure of the Mishnah all of a sudden gets switched when we come to this chapter? And Tosfos answers, he says that we're really looking at here, we're looking at a diuk. We wanted to add in an extra phrase. Because we're adding in that extra phrase, we're not doing the regular order of the Mishnayos. The phrase that we're adding in is Zehu hachalil shel beis HaShoeva she'eino doichel leis Shabbos. This is the flute that doesn't push off Shabbos, it doesn't push off Yom Tov. But there is another flute that does. Now, the other flute that does is the flute of the carbon, according to one opinion. Yeah, I don't know if you remember, try to remember these things, but yeah, it's hard to remember these things. But there's a machlekes in the Gemara. 2 opinions, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and the sages, regarding if you're allowed to play a flute on Yom Tov or Shabbos. Now, there's another machlekes between Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and there's another machlekes between Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yirmiyah, what the machlekes Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and the sages is about, which flute that the machlekes is. Okay. Now, Tosfos over here says that even though there's no shvus b'mikdash, even though there's no rabbinic laws of Shabbos and Yom Tov in the Beis HaMikdash, and nevertheless we're prohibiting to play the flute, Tosfos over here says that that's because this is not an essential rule of Simchas Beis HaShoeva. This is just an extra mitzvah. It's a simcha yasera. It's just extra. Because of that extra, it's just an additional benefit, and therefore we don't allow it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shalom Aleichem, David. Welcome. Okay. I'm going back to page 50 in the Gemara just to do a review because I'm taking over for my brother. So I went over the Mishnah and I discussed what the comments of Tosfos were on the Mishnah. Now we're going to start the Gemara on Nun Amud Beis 50b. It says Itmar. The word Itmar is a compound word in Aramaic. It's made up of two words. It's made up of the word is and amar. Now is a Aramaic word which is the same as yesh in Hebrew. Many times the Aramaic taf is exchanged for a Hebrew shin. That's how the language. Like for example, the word shar, which means an ox, in Aramaic is tura. The word for snow in Hebrew is sheleg. In Aramaic, it's talag. The word for three is shalosh in Hebrew. In Aramaic, it's tlas. So what you're seeing is the shin replaced with a tuf when it comes to Aramaic. So the word is in Aramaic is really the word yesh in Hebrew. Yesh means there is. So like we say, isa b'medrash tilim. What we're really saying is there is in the Medrash Tilim, which means there is a statement in the Medrash Tilim. Or here it says is itmar. The word itmar is amar. It has been stated. It has been said. So there's a statement between that's when it says itmar, there's usually telling me a machlekes. That's usually what happens. So there's a statement of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Eily. Now Rabbi Yehuda is a second generation of Meira. And Rabbi Eily, which is not as common, but I assume he would be around the same time. When it came to this Mishnah, there's two versions of the text. Now, you have to realize like this. When it comes to the Gemara, does the Gemara have the text of the Mishnah? The sages of the Talmud, did they have the text of the Mishnah written down? So this is a machlekes between Rashi and the Rambam. The Rambam writes that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote the Mishnah, and therefore the sages of the Talmud had the text of the Mishnah in a printed form, copyist form. The Rashi he says that no, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi edited the Mishnah, but he didn't. It still wasn't published until the days of Rav Ashi. Now, one of the sages, Reb Shrira Gaon, one of the Gaonim, Reb Shrira Gaon, one of the last of the Gaonim, he wrote a sort of a history of the Talmud. He was asked by the people of Kerwan to tell us the history of the Talmud, and he responds back with the letter. It's a famous letter. It's called the Geras Reb Shrira Gaon, letter of Reb Shrira Gaon. It's written in a very difficult Aramaic. It's not difficult for those that know Aramaic, but it's difficult for those that know Talmud. The Aramaic of the Talmud, it's harder than the Aramaic. It's not what you're used to when you study Talmud. It's a harder Aramaic. But it's been translated recently by ArtScroll in the book Introduction to the Talmud. That's the book of Reb Shrira Gaon. Now the letter of Reb Shrira Gaon has two editions to it. It has the Spanish edition. It has the French edition. Now in these editions, there's just minor variations. But in the French edition, over there it says that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote. I'm sorry. In the Spanish edition, it says that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote the Mishnah. In the French edition, it says that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi edited the Mishnah. And one of the publishers, the early publishers of Reb Shrira Gaon was Rabbi Elio Kitov. He published it with notes. And in the notes, he suggests that maybe the Rambam had the Spanish version. And that's why the Rambam writes, Reb Shirgan was before the Rambam. It was before Rashi, before the Rambam. That's the source of the Rambam, because that was the version that he had. That's why he says that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he's the one that wrote the Mishnah. And Rashi had the French version. And that's why he believes that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi only edited the Mishnah. Okay, now, whatever the case is, whether the Mishnah was written in the days of the Talmud or the Mishnah was just edited and it was memorized, that's the difference. According to it, was it still being memorized is the question. You find that that it says Tani Tana Kamed someone. A Tana taught in front of a certain Amoraic sage. Now the Tana, you see, the Mishnaic period is called Tanoim. The Amoraic period is called Amoraim. The Talmud period is called Amoraim. So there's the Tana and there's the Amora. However, during the days of the Amoraim, we still have a Tana teaching a Brisa. Now, how's there a Tana there? All the Tanaim were several generations earlier. The answer is that they had these certain sages in every yeshiva that memorized all the Brisas. And they were like a university library. Every university has a library. And every yeshiva had a Tana. And the Tana was not a Tana like the Tanaim. He was a Amora that had memorized Mishnayos, and he was just there just because he memorized it, and he would say the Mishnah, and then who would explain that Mishnah? That would have to be the teacher, but then the rabbi, the sage, would explain what the Tana was teaching. It was like pulling up something from the library in his memory, the library in his memory. He would recite it, didn't necessarily know the explanation for it, and the teacher would then. So there were things that were being memorized clearly during the days of the Amiram. The question is if the Mishnah as well. What happens in our Gemara is that it says, Zehu hachalil shel beis hashayeva. Now, there's one opinion here that says that's the correct word, shayeva. The other opinion says, Zehu chalil shel beis hachashuva. In other words, they had a different text, a different version to the text of the Mishnah. There were two versions to the text. And the Gemara tells us over here, Amar Marzucher says, neither of them are mistaken, because both of them can fit properly with the understanding of that we have. What does sheyeva mean? Sheyeva means to draw. Draw not as in to draw like an artist, but to draw as in to draw water. Sheyev is to draw. Now Tosfos here steps in and he says that you would assume that Simchas Beis Sheyeva means that they're drawing water. Tosfos says, well, from the Yerushalmi, it's explained that Sheyeva means that they're not drawing water, but they're drawing Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. They were drawing at the Simchas Beis Sheyeva. And he quotes that they would be able to get the Holy Spirit because of the joy that they had at the festivities. When there's extra joy, then there's more Holy Spirit. It says that the prophets, who was it? You would probably remember, but there was, I forget which king it was, maybe Uzziah. He was going to battle together with, we went with Yehoshaphat, and Yehoshaphat said, can you get for me a prophet, please, to tell us if we're going to win? And he gets all his prophets, and they said, no, those are not, get me a real prophet. And they bring Elisha. I think they bring Elisha. And he says, I really wouldn't be prophesying. I wouldn't even be here if not for Yehoshaphat, and they bring someone to play music so that he should be able to get his spirit back, so he should be able to say prophecy. So the music was going to help him get the Holy Spirit to be able to say prophecy. So the prophet's mood was very significant. So it says that Yoina, the prophet, Yoina ben Amittai, one that went to Nineveh, so he received his prophecy when he became a prophet, when he was Oila Regel, when he went to the temple and he heard the music there at the Simchas Beis Sheva. The rejoicing of the Simchas Beis Sheva brought on him the spirit of prophecy, the Ruach HaKodesh. So when it says over here, Simchas Beis Sheva, the rejoicing of the house of drawing, it's not just the drawing of the water, but it's the drawing of the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh that's coming on him. That's the Yerushalmi's interpretation, and Tosfos quotes this on the top of the page. The other opinion is that it's chashuva. And why would we get chashuva? So the Gemara explains. Man detani sheyeva leimeshtabish. The one that says that it's called sheyeva is not making a mistake, because the pasuk says ushavtem mayim besasim. You draw water with joy. The pasuk says you draw water. It says the drawing ruach hakodesh. Guess the Yerushalmi's version is different than the Bavli's, and the Bavli's version is it's drawing water. In the Yerushalmi, it's drawing ruach hakodesh. Let me just take a look if there's anyone waiting to enter. Very good. Okay. Mandatani chashuva le'mishtabish, the one that says that we're talking about the celebration of chashuva means important. The house of it, that's important. Why is it? Why would we say that that's the correct version? Because this is following the view that what they poured the water into on the altar went down into these deep crevices in the crust of the earth. That went down into these chambers that were there in the crust of the earth since the 6 days of creation. So, okay. So that's quite significant. That's what they call chashuva, that this is very important. Like chashuva is important or significant. Okay, that is the introduction to this. Now, Tosfos points out, I said we were going to look at some Tosfos in here. Tosfos points out that what the Gemara just did here, it does in many places. It says that we have two opinions. One says this and one says that. And neither of them are wrong. And okay, that's even if it comes to the language of the text, what's the version of the text? However, Tosfos says that there is one place where this is done a little different. The Gemara Avodah Zarah, what the Daf Yomi is learning. Now, the Gemara Avodah Zarah says that before the Eidehem of the non-Jews, before the Eidehem of the idolaters. Now, it uses the word Eidehem. Now, Eidehem means holidays. Now, it's probably associated in English, but the Ides of March. That expression. And Ides means the 15th of the month, right? So the Aramaic for that would be Eidehem. Apparently, they would celebrate the 15th of the month, or the holidays were on the 15th of the month, just like they would copy the Jewish holidays. So Eidehem in the Mishnah means the holiday. Now, there's two versions to that. One is Eidehem with an aleph, and one is Eidehem with a ayin. And it's referring to the idolatrous holidays. And the Gemara says over there that if you say Eidehem is with a aleph, okay, that's correct. If you say Eidehem is with an ayin, that's also correct. Eidehem with an ayin means witness, because it says that they're going to bring witness to the people that worship them. That's to get the people that worship them into trouble. So if you say Eidehem with an aleph, it's okay, and if you say Eidehem with an ayin, that's also okay. This is the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, the first piece. And then the Gemara over there says that why did the one that say it with an aleph not say it with an ayin? Why did the one that say it with an ayin not say it with an aleph? And the Gemara goes through what they wanted to do. Why it did. So Tosfos asks, why does our Gemara not do also that same sort of questioning? Why the one that says Sheyeva, why does he not say Chashuva? Why does the one that say Chashuva not say Sheyeva? Why does our Gemara not do what the Gemara in Avodah Zarah does? That's Tosfos' question. Tosfos does not answer. He doesn't give an answer. So he just leaves us there hanging. There's this famous story with someone that had a question in the Gemara, and he wrote to the Rogatchover. And the Rogatchover was known as a great genius. And he wrote him back, see Tosfos on this page, see Tosfos on that page, see Tosfos on the other page, like a whole list of Tosfos. And he looked up, the fellow that received the letter, he looked up all the Tosfos, and they had nothing to do with his question. He couldn't figure it out. So next time it was at like some gathering of some sort, the Rogatchover was there. So he went over to him and he said, you sent me that letter, but it has nothing to do with my question. So the Rogatchover told him, no, I was showing you something else. I was showing you that the Tosfos on that page had a question, and he doesn't answer it. And the Tosfos on that page has a question, and he doesn't answer it. But you see that Tosfos continued learning after that. He didn't get stuck just because he had that question. That was my point to you, was that just because there's a question doesn't mean that you stop and say, oh, there's a question, okay, we can't go further. He says, no, there's questions, and the Gemara goes on, the Tosfos goes on, and still continue learning even though there's a question. Okay. Now the Gemara continues with a Tanu Rabbanan. Tanu Rabbanan is the way the Gemara introduces a brisa. Now, Reb Shri Regain says that there's different types of brisas, and the Tanu Rabbanan is a major brisa. It's a brisa that's been edited by Reb Chanina and Reb Chi and Rabbi Shia. Those were the main editors of the brisa, and the Tanu Rabbanan has that significance. It's a more significant sort of brisa. Well, the brisa says like this. Brisa says that the flute, hachalil doiches Shabbos. You can play the flute on Shabbos. It's going to contradict our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said you can't play the flute on Shabbos. Talking about the flute of the Simchas Beis Sheva in our Mishnah. The brisa doesn't say what it's talking about. It just says the flute can be played on Shabbos. That's the words of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is usually understood to be the son of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Now, Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. If the Mishnah wants to tell us Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, it would say Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, or it would say Rebbe. When the Mishnah says Rabbi Yehuda, it's usually referring to Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. He was one of the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva that survived after the plague. After the plague, that all the 24,000 students passed away. Rabbi Akiva had 5 students that afterwards, very important students. They were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Meir it was usually not quoted by his father's name. It's just Rabbi Meir. I'm not even sure what his father's name was, but his wife was also famous. Her name was Bruria. And she was famous because she was the daughter of Rabbi Hanani ben Tradian, was one of the 10 martyrs. And Bruria herself has some comments in the Gemara. She was a very sharp woman. That's Reb Meir. And another student of Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta was his name. He was the one that was exiled by the Romans when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai spoke against the Romans. And there was a death penalty put on Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So Rabbi Yossi didn't comment during that conversation. He was silent. And because of that, they exiled him to the city of Tzipori. Rabbi Yossi had a son, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Rabbi Yossi, was also very famous. But really, Rabbi Yossi's big work was something called Seder Olam, the Jewish history. All the dates in our calendar come from a book called Seder Olam. How long, what year Avraham was born, and when this happened, and all of these things, and Noach, and all of those dates was all written down by Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. The book is available, Seder Olam. It's also written in Aramaic. It's a little bit difficult, but it's available. I'm not sure if it's translated into English. Rabbi Yossi, that's Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. The Gemara speaks very highly of Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says, Nimuka Yimai, that the halacha is usually like Rabbi Yossi. Then there's Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda is Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily is very common in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, very, very common. Whenever the Mishnah says Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. He's buried right on the way to Tzfas, right at the entrance right as you're going up the mountain, towards the top of the mountain is the Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. He was very poor. He didn't even have food to eat. Reb Tarfon allowed him to eat beets from his garden, and because of that, his cheeks got red. There was a Roman woman that asked him, like, "Why? How come his cheeks are red?" She said that he looks drunk. It was from the beets. There's another statement in the Gemara where his face was shining. He said that was because he found a new Tosefta, a new brisa that made him shine. But the Gemara tells us that one time Rabbi Gamliel asked Rabbi Yehuda, "How come you didn't come to the Beis Medrash last night?" And Rabbi Yehuda says, "Because I only have one pair of clothing, and my wife was wearing it, and she wanted to go out, so I was stuck at home." So he was very poor. The Gemara also tells us about Rabbi Yehuda's students; they were also poor. It says that 6 students could dress themselves in one talis. That probably means in the cold they would cover themselves in one talis. It means that they didn't have the means to have proper clothing. The commentaries explain that one talis, they say that if each person is taking the talis for themselves, then there's only enough room in the one talis for one person. But if each person cares about the other person and is stretching it over the other person, then you can fit 6 people. So it depends on your mindset. But okay, so that's Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. Now I'm telling this to you because here we have Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would be the son of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. So this is a 2nd generation off from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's students is Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, of course Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai also, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shmuel. Their son is now Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. His opinion here is that the flute is allowed to be played on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. Now again, doesn't tell us which flute this is talking about. Our assumption is flute. Oh, Simchas Beis Sheva, right? That would be our assumption. Okay. The Chacham say that the flute can't be played even on Yom Tov. No, he's strict about this. That there's no playing musical instruments at all on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So there's a machlekes here between Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, who I explained to you, that's the son of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily, and the Chachamim. Now, were they in the temple? No, they were not in the temple. They were after the temple times. You see, Rabbi Akiva was after the temple times. The sages that were at the destruction of the temple would be Rabbi Akiva's teachers, Rabbi Eliezer, who's Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, and Rabbi Yeshua, who's Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They were the ones that were at the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Akiva is later than this. When he was around, it may have been older, but when he was around, that would have been well after the destruction of the temple, and he was at the revolt of Beitar. That would be his time. So his students would be probably a little bit after that. We're talking about the year, instead of 70, we're talking about the year 130, approximately. That's this time that we're talking about. So they're having a discussion about what was allowed in the temple back, 60 years earlier or whatever. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, now Rabbi Yosef is an Amira. He's much later than this price that we just quoted. He's an Amira, is probably around the year 300, let's say. So we're 100-something years later. And he steps in over here. He says, Machlekes b'shir shel karban. Let me go back and tell you. Remember, there was a Machlekes back between Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about if you're allowed to play a flute on Yom Tov. Let me tell you which flute they're talking about. That machlekes was about the flute of a carbon. When they would bring a carbon, they would play an instrument. The Rabbi Eily Savar Ikashir Bekeli. Rabbi Eily holds that they're allowed to play the flute because when the Torah says that you bring the sacrifice on the holiday, one of the parts of the sacrifice is to play the musical instrument. So if you're allowed to slaughter it, you can also play the musical instrument. It's part of the service of the temple. Perfect. Service of the temple. You're allowed to play the flute on the Doiches Shabbos. It pushes off Shabbos. Rabbanan Savar Ikashir Bepeh. Rabbanan say, yes, there is music. There is music at the sacrifices, but that the main music was the singing. This would be like a difference between the people like chazanas. Yeah, anyone like chazanas? So chazanas is mainly vocal. There's very little instrument in chazanas. A little bit of piano in the background sometimes. What do they call the organ? What's it called? The klezmer play. It goes in and out. It's a piano that they play. Accordion. Yeah. So there's very little music there's very little instrumental music in chazanas. A little bit in the background. So the question is, when they were bringing the sacrifices, what was the main music there? Was it chazanas, or was it mainly the orchestra, and then it was singing to go along with it? So what Rabbi Yosef says is that this is a machlekes. It's a machlekes between the two sages here. Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Yehuda, he says that it was mainly instrumental music, mainly instruments, and so therefore you're allowed to play the instrument. That was the main part of the service of the together with the sacrifice would be the instrument. And the Chachamim say no, it was mainly chazanas, mainly vocals, and so therefore you weren't allowed to play the instrument because you can satisfy the requirements of the music without playing the instrument. Okay, now okay, that is the way Rabbi Yosef explains this. Rabbi Yosef adds in, but everyone would agree with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that you're not allowed to play the flute for the Simchas Beis Sheva on Shabbos. Everyone would agree with that. That's just an additional simcha, playing those instruments, and everyone would agree that that's prohibited on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. What about Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda that says you're allowed to play the flute on Shabbos? He says, yeah, that's the flute of a sacrifice, not the flute of the Simchas Beis Sheva. Okay. I should jump to the next page. So let me jump to the next page, and then I'll because the flow. What happens in this Gemara is that there's two opinions how to learn this brisa, this Tana Rabbanan that we mentioned. There's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is the teacher of Abaya. He's the one that says at the end of Masech Saita that says Mishabeis Rebbe, when Rebbe passed away, there's no more humility in the world. And Rabbi Yosef says, you shouldn't, that's not accurate because there's still me, I'm still around. That was Rabbi Yosef saying that there's still this humility because he was, Rabbi Yosef it's interesting because he became the Rosh Hashiva after Rabbah. Rabbah was the Rosh Hashiva in Pumbedisa for 22 years. Rabbah means great. Rabbah was great. Rabbah was the teacher of Abaya and Rava. Rabbi Yosef was also the teacher of Abaya. Now, one of the difficulties Rabbi Yosef had in his life was that he wasn't like the deep analytical. He had an amazing memory, called Sinai. Like he was a receiver of the Torah, he had amazing memory. However, due to illness, probably he forgot everything that he learned, or a lot of what he learned. And when he would teach, Abaya would remind him of things that he had forgotten. But didn't you say last time? And he would like bring it up. And Rabbi Yosef would accept Abaya's his reminding him. I forget who it is in the Gemara Brachas that says that a sage that forgets his learning should be respected, just like a sage that. And it does a comparison. It says that just like the broken tablets are in the ark next to the complete tablets, so too the sage that forgot his learning compared to the broken tablets still deserves the respect. Anyway, so Rabbi Yosef had forgotten his learning, and he still became the Rosh Hashiva even after that. Now, the difficulty that he had was, well, he had a great memory, he could read it again. Rabbi Yosef was blind. So this is like a compound problem. He was relying on his memory, which he lost. Well, we try to read it again, and he can't because he's blind. So he really had it difficult, and nevertheless, he still took the job as the Rosh Hashiva. One of the commentaries say that that's why he said that there still is humility, because sometimes people say, you can't be proud of your good name, because a good name you could lose. In 1 hour, a person could lose his good name, and it goes down the drain. He makes a bad mistake about something, he does something that he shouldn't have done, and he loses his good name. You can't be proud about wealth, because there's a cycle of wealth. People could lose their money. You can't be proud about that. What someone could be proud of is his Torah knowledge, because how does he lose that? He studied a lot of Torah. So comes along Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef says, no, you can't be proud about that either. Look at me. There still is humility, because you can't be, if you look at me, I'm an example of that, where I had great Torah knowledge and I lost that as well. So Rabbi Yosef has his interpretation of what the Brisa says. This is Rabbi Yosef. He says that the Brisa, there's a machlekes in the Brisa, and has nothing to do with the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, everyone agrees you're not allowed to play that on Shabbos. And the next page, we have Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba is the older Rabbi Yirmiyah, not the Rabbi Yirmiyah that had all the questions. This is the older Rabbi Yirmiyah. And he says, Machlekes b'shir shel sheyeva. No, the Machlekes is about the instrument that was used, the flute that was used by the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. And there's one opinion that says that you're allowed to play it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. That opinion cannot be the opinion of our Mishnah. So it's interesting. Now we have a Mishnah that says it cannot be played on Shabbos and Yom Tov. We have a Brisa that says it's a machlekes if it can be played on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Who's the opinion that holds that it can be? According to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, that would be the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Machlekes b'shir shel sheyeva on page Nun Aleph, page 51. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda savar simchi yisera nami deiches Shabbos. He says the additional rejoicing is significant enough to push off Shabbos. What's the problem with playing the flute on Shabbos? It's a rabbinic decree that you may end up fixing an instrument. All right, you're in the Beis HaMikdash. We don't have the rabbinic decrees in the Beis HaMikdash. It's the easy way out. Rabbanan Savri, Simchi Yisir Eina Deiches HaShabbos, Avos Shir Shel Kam Divrei Kol Avodah V'Deiches HaShabbos. Okay. The Rabbanan hold, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, the Rabbanan hold that even the strictness of not playing an instrument applies to the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva as well, and you can't play it on Shabbos. Now, it's good that the Rabbanan say that, because that would support our Mishnah that says that the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva is only 5 days or 6 days, depending on if Shabbos falls on Yom Tov or if Shabbos falls on Chol Hamoed. Yom Tov falls on. on Shabbos, or if Yom Tov, or if Chol Hamoed is Shabbos. That's the so obviously, why is that significant? Because if it's on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you can't play the flute, and that fits with the Rabbanan. The Gemara asks a question. Meisavei. Remember we mentioned that the taf and the shin are interchangeable in Aramaic. So the word shuv means to return, and actually means like to retort. Meisavei, a retort, a question is asked. It's interesting. I should explain this. I guess that the word Mishnah is with a shin. The reason why Mishnah is called Mishnah is because it's associated with the word Shana. Shana means a year, and a year is a cycle. It goes around. Every year you have the same cycle. It goes around again. Shana. Shaina means to repeat, and the Mishnayos was learned by heart, by rote, by repeating. So the word Mishnah is automatically associated with learning something by heart. So we were discussing before about the Mishnayos being learned by heart. Now, when the Gemara wants to tell you that there's a Mishnah, or if the Gemara wants to tell you that there's a Bryce, it says Masnisa or Masnisin. The taf in the Masni, that's a taf, that's a suf. That's really replacing the shin of Mashne, which is the Mishnah. So the Aramaic taf is another place where you find the Aramaic taf replacing the shin of the Hebrew shin. Okay. The Gemara has a question now. The question is, it says, Shir Shel Sheyeva. The song of the Sheyeva, Doiches HaShabbos, pushes off the Shabbos. Divri Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. That's the words of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. 1 second. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, wonderful. That's Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. They argue about the flute of the Simchas Beis Sheva. Are you allowed to play it on Shabbos? That's Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba's the way he explains the machlekes. However, according to Rabbi Yosef, that says that when it comes to the Simchas Beis Sheva, everyone agrees that you're not allowed to play it on Shabbos. So how do we have a brisa that says that you're allowed to play it on Shabbos according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? Where it says, Tiyufta de Rabbi Yosef. Is this a strong question on Rabbi Yosef? Where it says, yes, Tiyufta, it's a strong question on Rabbi Yosef. We ask a very strong question on Rabbi Yosef because of a brisa. We have, in other words, this brisa that we have now is telling us how to learn the Tanu Rabbanan brisa that we had before. Because this brisa elaborates, it adds in 2 words that we didn't have in the Tanu Rabbanan brisa. The Tanu Rabbanan brisa said, Hachalil, Doiches HaShabbos. The flute pushes off Shabbos. The brisa that we have here is Shir Shel Sheyeva, which means the flute or the song of the Sheyeva, Doiches HaShabbos. Those extra words tell me how to learn the other brisa, the other Tanu Rabbanan. And it says, and those words tell me that it's actually talking about the flute of the Simchas Beis Sheva, not the flute of the sacrifice. This is the all-nighter flute, not the, okay. The Gemara suggests, Lema b'shir shel shevu de pliga b'shir shel kamen divra kol deichas Shabbos. This is what we call in Gemara term, we call it a diuk. In English, you would have to say an implication. What's implied from this brisa is that there's a machlekes about Simchas Beis Sheva. That's what's stated. Machlekes about Simchas. What's implied from that is that the machlekes is only about the Simchas Beis Sheva, but not about the karban. That's the implication. What it says is there's a machlekes about Simchas Beis Sheva. What it implies is that it's not about the karban. So we had one question on Rabbi Yosef from what it says. We have another question about what it implies, from what it implies. What it says is that the machlekes about Simchas Beis Sheva. Rabbi Yosef says there was no machlekes about that. What it implies is that there's no machlekes about the karban. Rabbi Yosef says there is a machlekes about the karban. So now the Gemara says, we should say that there's a machlekes, that there's a strong question on Rabbi Yosef in two things. one on the statement and one on what one from the statement, one from what it implies. The Gemara says, well, the second part we can answer. Yeah. Let's leave it over here. Let's leave it over here. The Gemara is gonna say that we can try to answer it, but then the Gemara is gonna say no. Actually, it's a machlekes on Rabbi Yosef in two ways. Two ways. All right. Today is Gimel Tamuz, which is the day of the passing of the Rebbe, and we know from the Navi, we know from Eliyahu Navi, that Eliyahu Navi went up to heaven alive, and his student Elisha tore his clothes and all of that. So as much as the Rebbe is alive, but it's still a day of like Elisha was Avi Rechav Yisrael, the chariot of Israel. We need you. It still has that connotation as whatever significance it also has something that we're not able to see the leader with our physical eyes, and that's it's a day when we have introspection and all of that we write upon, and that's why Rabbi Smith went to the Oil to visit the cemetery. All right.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
I looked up Seder Olam in English.
Oh, you have it?
It's in Sfaria.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It took me right to the link. I just put it in like Google Seder Olam in English. It took me right to the link. Yeah.
Amazing, because it's a very difficult Aramaic. It's not an easy Aramaic. Yeah. From the Seder, there's a famous issue in Jewish history. There's the missing 168 years that we have between our calendar and the conventional calendar. Anyway, that's a whole topic, but it's based on the Seder Olam, and we're definitely closer to Mashiach than